Welcome to the next episode of Called to the Bar International Law Over Drinks, a series of casual conversations about current issues in international law, life in academia, and whatever else is on our mind. Remember, in these conversations we are speaking off the cuff and without benefit of footnotes, and nothing we say should be taken to have been thoroughly peer-reviewed. I'm Dr. Juliette McIntyre, Senior Lecturer in Law at Adelaide University, and today we have two amazing guests, Mykola Yurlov and Mark Ellis. Honestly, I'm a bit intimidated. Here to discuss the practicalities and possibilities of the Special Tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Mykola is a counsellor with the Department of International Law, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, and Mark is the Executive Director of the International Bar Association, the foremost organisation for international legal practitioners, bar associations and law societies, and only slightly younger than the United Nations itself. The IBA, that is, not Mark. Welcome both to the pod. Of course, we must begin with our first question. What's your drink?
Mykola, what do you have on your drink today?
So, my favorite drink, and it's a very special one for my heart, it's called the White Muscat of the Red Stone. It's produced in Crimea, in my home city of Sevastopol, which was invaded and occupied by the Russians in 2014, starting the Russian aggression against Ukraine. And it is produced by Massandra Winery, which has also been, of course, expropriated by the Russians. So that wine is no longer with us anymore. But when the Ukrainian flag will fly over Sevastopol again, we'll make sure to restart the proper production.
Oh my gosh. And I'll make sure to buy a bottle. My goodness. Mark.
Right. Well, there's nothing I can do that's going to surpass that. Nothing, because all I was going to say was a gin and tonic, but always with a cigar. So I would have to add the cigar with the drink, but that's how I would do it in the evening.
Nice. My co-host Tamsin would approve of the cigar. Absolutely.
What's your favorite cigar?
Well, it's a Romeo Julieta, and it is I get them, or I used to get them when I went to Cuba. Now, gosh knows what's going to happen there, but that's my favorite cigar. It's not a Cohiba; it's a bit too strong for me. But the Romeo Julietas to me are just right, and with a good gin and tonic, that's it. So
I have already learned so much.
Yes, yes. We will do that, Mykola. Again, we will do that in Kyiv, or when I get there. So we'll do that.
And then in Sevastopol when we liberate.
Okay, good.
Oh my God, I'm like literally, regular listeners will know I'm usually the one with the alcoholic beverage, but tonight I'm just drinking tea, so I feel very out of place. All right, now look, both of you are first-time guests of the pod, and so I'd love to get a little bit of biography from both of you. Our listeners always love to hear about how it is that you reached your current position. What pathway did you follow into the field of international law? Mykola, would you like to start us off?
Well, the pathway to international law, wow, that was, it started when I joined the Yaroslav Mudry National Law University back in 2008 during my first year. A good friend of mine has advised me to visit the International Law Society, which was by then run by Professor Borominsky, who was the chair of International Law Department in Kharkiv, and Professor Senatorova Oksana, who was direct leader of the International Law Society. And these two professors have, together with the whole Department of International Law in Kharkiv, have actually been those who have inspired me to take on the career of international law. I didn't get to it right away. I've had some other positions, but my first direct engagement came when the war began in 2014, and I started advising the government on the rules of the law of armed conflict, qualification of the armed conflict, and disproving the Russian claims that that's a non-international armed conflict, and how can we prove that it is an international conflict, and all the corpus of the rules of IHL or LOAC applied to it. Then I moved to private sector. I've done an investor state arbitration for a while. which I call the dark side of international law for obvious reasons. But I didn't only act for investors. I had a case for the state, so I kind of feel that my soul is more or less on balance on that. And then when the full-scale invasion began, when the big war came to our home, I tried to get mobilized, tried to fight in the army, but I was repeatedly rejected. So I started working with Geneva Call, which is a Swiss NGO, and I came back to teaching IHL to military, to fighters. Then I worked with Truth Hounds, documenting war crimes and crimes against humanity. And since 2024, I've joined first the Ministry of Justice and then the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where I work on the Special Tribunal, the compensation mechanism, and the Russian mobilized assets. I'm also a big fan of Jessup competition, which I also have to mention as a major source of my inspiration. I've played Jessup 6 times. I've coached Jessup 4 times. I've been the national administrator, judge, and hoping to write a case for it one day. So Jessup all the way.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. Mark, would you like to share your
Yeah,
story?
here's it's similar to when I listened to Mykola about his favorite drink. I've known him for a number of years, and he's so exceedingly modest because those are points that he's just mentioned that I didn't know about, and it just impresses me more and more how remarkable he is. So mine was a little different. I always had an interest in international affairs, so that was my undergraduate degree, and then went into law school. But I was very fortunate in the States. They have something called the Fulbright Scholarship, and I was able to obtain that, and that changed my whole trajectory. I was in the former Yugoslavia in the early 1980s, and then in 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, I actually, and I can say this in a fairly remarkable way. I don't know if it was by luck, but I was actually in East Berlin the week the Berlin Wall fell, and that was quite extraordinary for me, and that also kept me on this trajectory. Later, I was in Sarajevo during the war when Yugoslavia broke apart. So it was natural that I started moving into this field of international criminal law. I went back to school to get my doctorate in that field, and then started working with the new emerging courts for Yugoslavia, Rwanda, Cambodia, domestic Serbia. So did a lot of that, and then worked in post 1989 in former Yugoslavia, and also in former Soviet Union for 10 years at a project for the American Bar Association, and then was hired by the International Bar Association, and I've been here ever since. So that's kind of my trajectory.
Yeah. Oh, fascinating. Thank you both so much for sharing. I mean, in a way, you have something in common, sort of being like living international law in a way, which is really interesting. And Mark, of course, you mentioned some of the previous tribunals that we've seen come into existence in relation to Yugoslavia, for example, and that really leads us nicely into the subject for today, which is the Special Tribunal for Ukraine, because in June last year, after very lengthy negotiations, we saw the Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Alain Berset, and the President of Ukraine, I can't speak tonight, Volodymyr Zelensky, signing an agreement to establish this special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Mykola, for those who might not be familiar with how we got here, could you tell us a bit more about the process leading up to signing this final agreement?
Sure. I must say that I have only started engaging with the work on the Special Tribunal halfway through the work. It was in 2024 when I joined the Ministry of Justice. And the work has been going since 2022, but I can recollect from what my colleagues have been telling me. Basically, it all began when the Russians decided to launch a full-scale invasion, dramatically escalating their ongoing 8-year war against Ukraine. And the international community, specifically legal community, to which I owe a special credit to, has immediately responded with an idea that, look, the ICC, we all cherish it and we highly respect it, but the Kampala amendments regime, for those who do not know, initially the crime of aggression was discussed in the Rome Statute, but due to disagreements, it was not included in the first stage. And following the Kampala review process, the amendments have been introduced that would allow the court to try the crime of aggression, but only in case of either a referral by the United Nations Security Council, which is clearly impossible with Russia and China sitting on it, or if the party, the national which commits the crime of aggression, has ratified the Kampala agreements, which is again obviously not the case because Russia is not a member state of the Rome Statute, nor will it ever, in the observable future, become a member of the Kampala. That's why Philip Sands, one of the world's leading international lawyers, has published his now famous op-eds in Financial Times calling for a special tribunal for the crime of aggression to be created. And at the moment, that was such a controversial idea, I have to say, because never since the end of the World War II and after the Tokyo and Nuremberg trials, never has the crime of aggression been tried. At the same time, the outrageousness of this specific invasion aimed not only at territorial conquest, as we saw with the annexation, with the further attempted annexation of Ukrainian territories, and the genocidal nature of Russian conduct in the occupied territories and elsewhere, was that it prompted the international community to respond. And with time, in 2023, the so-called core group of states has been formed as an informal gathering of legal advisors of about 40 states that have started to think in which way this tribunal could be formed, given that we all know the deficiencies of the current UN system and the lack of precedents for the tribunals for the crime of aggression. So it was an extraordinarily challenging task. I have joined the core group by the time when the idea came to the Council of Europe, using its framework as an international organization based on protection of human rights, to use it as a kind of umbrella for this special tribunal. And over the course of the next year, I have engaged in various meetings of the core group where we have discussed all the sensitive and divisive issues that we had on immunities, on the transfer or referral of proceedings, on the definition of the crime of aggression, and on in absentia trials. So without further, I can go for hours talking about this extremely intellectually enriching debates in which we have participated. But thanks to the participation of and real creative spirit that we had in these meetings, we've managed to find the best solution under the current circumstances, which has crystallized itself in the bilateral agreement between Ukraine and the Council of Europe, which was signed, as you mentioned, last year and ratified by Parliament. And we hope to see very soon the next element to launch the first part, because it's only one of the two necessary instruments, that is the enlarged partial agreement on the management committee. Now, enlarged partial agreement may sound a bit strange for international lawyers, but the name is actually self-explanatory. Enlarged means that although it's a Council of Europe treaty, it is enlarged to include non-Council of Europe members, and partial meaning that it's not obligatory for all Council of Europe members. So like with the Register of Damage, where we had a very similar enlarged partial agreement, non-Council of Europe members are free to participate in this instrument, and not all Council of Europe members are obliged to participate in it. That's the name. And the Management Committee, because it allows the countries to contribute to management, to financing and organization, making this tribunal an international one, rather than a Ukrainian tribunal rooted in Ukrainian law and jurisdiction.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that's I think that's given everyone a lot of background that maybe isn't necessarily so publicly available, except to those who are very familiar. I mean, Mark, you are obviously involved in some of the earlier UN tribunals. Do you see are there parallels to the way that this tribunal has come about to some of those previous discussions, do you think? And just a sidebar, I'm completely going off script and throwing this question at Mark with absolutely no preparation whatsoever. So sorry about that.
It's a great question. And I think what's unique about what's happening in this particular tribunal, the Special Tribunal for the Crime of Aggression, is how quickly it's moved forward. That would be, in my experience in the past and working with these other tribunals, international justice, international criminal justice particularly, it's a long journey. If you think how extraordinary this is, with Mykola saying the discussion started initially in 2022, end of 2022. I remember in the 2023 really beginning to talk about it. And to know now in 2026 that this is now it has been launched. It's going through a sequence of events. That's extraordinary, and I think that shows the commitment by states to ensure that those accountable for the most heinous crime. Remember that the crime of aggression is the supreme crime because everything that follows from that first act, this step of aggression, and I think it's good for all of us to remember we just marked the 80th anniversary of the UN Charter this past year, and the UN Charter at its base under Article 2 said there's a prohibition against the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. That's so core. What Russia has done against Ukraine is a textbook example of the crime of aggression. There's not since World War II have we seen this. And therefore, my position, and I've been very consistent about this, if we as an international community cannot ensure that the leadership of Russia and other states who are responsible for this crime, if we can't ensure that they're brought to account, I'm not sure when we would. This is the time for the international community to stand up and to support and reinforce the principles of the UN Charter and to say this is not acceptable under international law, and we have to hold those individuals accountable. I think that's the real crux for me on what's happening.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, that in upholding the core principle of the United Nations, we've had to step outside of that institution, though, because, of course, with the veto that Russia holds at the Security Council, there was no possibility of any kind of Security Council tribunal being established, which was the previous model. And then, as you mentioned, we do have the ICC, which has jurisdiction over the crime of aggression, but there are other problems with enforcing that. But was there any pushback to this idea of the need to establish a special tribunal? Was it, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, right? Like, as you say, prosecuting this crime of crimes when the other institutions are not able to do so. But was there a bit of chatter sort of saying, well, we have these other institutions already, we don't need another new one?
Mykola, do you want to say a word? I definitely have some thoughts on it, but from Ukrainian's perspective.
We had a quite strong opposition from the prosecutor of the ICC, Mr. Karim Khan. He tried to sabotage the idea of the special tribunal as much as possible, even going as far as trying to reach out to the leadership of Ukraine and explain to them that the tribunal is a bad idea. But I have to say, thankfully, we are right now in full alignment with the register of the ICC and the other key prosecutors that the ICC will not in any way be hurted be heard by the Special Tribunal. There are explicit rules on complementarity and even prevalence of the ICC's investigations over the Special Tribunal's investigations in case when a very same person is apprehended, the priority shall be given to the ICC hearings, not to the Special Tribunal hearings. Of course, there was additional pushback from some of the actors, let's put it this way, who are against international justice overall. That's as much that I can say at this moment. But we've so far been lucky enough to be able to overcome this reluctance.
And I think that's the key part, that despite these types of challenges and hurdles, this tribunal is moving forward, and I said earlier, in a very rapid rate in relations to how international law generally moves. But I don't think we should be surprised about the fact that there were pushback on this. I mean, the crime of aggression is directed at the very top military and political leaders. That will cause all states to be concerned about how you go about creating a process that actually targets those particular individuals. State sovereignty is very powerful, and they'll protect those leaders, both political and military. And so within this tribunal, the other thing that I thought was extraordinary were the compromises that were made, and I think they had to be made regarding, for instance, head of state immunity. But the compromise were made in a way that ensured that this tribunal, the first tribunal existing that's going to pursue the crime of aggression since Nuremberg, succeeds. And I think that's an extraordinary development in international law. And it's not just a development that's important for Ukraine. As I say, this is exceedingly important for the international community and for international law generally.
Yeah, and look, I'd love to turn now to some practicalities about, how is the tribunal going to work? Because you've both mentioned immunities, and I'm really interested in this question in particular, but there's other things as well. So, how far have we gone? Do we have settled rules about procedure and evidence at this stage? Do we have any sense of who the judges will be, or the prosecutors, or even who potential individuals might be who might be prosecuted eventually? I mean, we know that Putin, for example, has an ICC arrest warrant out over him. Yeah, give me. I'm such a procedure nerd. Give me all the details. I love this stuff.
Mykola, go ahead, start, and I'll jump in.
Yeah. So at this moment, we are only setting up the institutional framework. Legally, it has been decided. Now, a very important development that has happened already, it was the launch of the so-called advance team. While we are ironing out all the details related to the premises of the Special Tribunal, to the funding and how much will the budget actually be, we have already agreed with the European Union and the Council of Europe, and it was approved by the members of the core group that participated in the development of the Special Tribunal, that is, advanced team has been set up and already received a significant contribution from the European Union in the sum of 10 million euros to allow it to start this type of organizational work. But before we get to the actual appointment of the defense counsel, prosecutors, judges, and administrative staff, some of the more critical issues need to be resolved, such as the hostage agreement, cooperation agreements that would allow the states to exchange evidence, ensure witness protection, work on the execution of not potential, but upcoming sentences of the Special Tribunal. The question of the judges, prosecutors, and defense counsel will be managed by the management committee. And the statute of the Special Tribunal is out there. You can look into it. I will not be quoting specific articles there in the interest of time. But overall, there will be a selection process for the judges, and the nationals of any state may apply. So it's not limited to the participants of the core or to the nationals of the core group member states. And that's one of the jobs that the advanced team will be also dealing with time, together with the management committee, when it will be set up to look for the best international law professionals in the world. We are very much interested in cross-regional representation, since it's an international tribunal and it has to include the very best legal professionals from all over the world. And this is what we're also telling during our outreach activities. As you may know, together with Mark, we have been visiting Australia and New Zealand recently. It was an outreach campaign supported by the International Bar Association and funded by the International Renaissance Foundation, of the Open Society Foundations, with this very purpose. Australia does participate in the core group discussions. New Zealand doesn't. We're trying to get New Zealand on board, but we're also trying to reach out to the states of the Pacific to make sure that they have the knowledge that this process will be ongoing. And we are very interested in engaging the legal professionals in this. Just as in any other region, our previous outreach efforts have been in Latin America. We visited Chile, Paraguay, and Argentina, and we're now also planning trips to Asia and Africa to talk to their legal communities to make sure that they know of this opportunity.
The other thing I would say from what Mykola says, this is so important now that there's kind of a set sequencing process now for this tribunal. And as Mykola had mentioned earlier, this enlarged partial agreement, it's really just to get states now to sign on to be able to be either an associated or kind of full member of the tribunal, this management committee. And this is a process that's now going on, and the IBA is very much trying to support this in any way it can. And I think one of the practical issues that's being dealt with right now is, what's the cost of this? The states are going to be asked to participate in this. It's very reasonable for states to say, as we sign up, we'd like to know what our financial commitment is going to be, and that, I think, Mykola would say this as well. That's what's being developed now and being assessed. And I think that will make it much easier for states to say, yes, we're going to commit ourselves to this. And one other point, when you look at the statute of this particular tribunal, it does pull from other tribunals, ad hoc tribunals that have existed. And Mykola had mentioned the judges' selections, and there's actually the kind of the management committee will appoint a 7-member panel that will review suggested candidates for judges, and I think that's really important. That shows that the openness and the I think the professionalism of ensuring it's transparent and you're getting as many voices together to make sure that this works.
Yeah, because I mean, so Ukraine, and I'm not just complimenting you because you're sitting in front of me, Mykola, but like Ukraine has done an extraordinary job of building cooperative support around the world. I mean, we look at the interventions in the ICJ case as well. I have been to speeches that the president has given to universities around the world. And I think it's a really fascinating and I'm saying interesting, but that's not a very interesting word. Example of the power of collective action in international law, that when states get together and can actually achieve international justice. And I think that's an important lesson in the current environment, perhaps, where we're seeing a lot of people talk about the ineffectuality of international law. What do you see as being some of the major benefits of the tribunal? Are they benefits? I mean, there are obviously benefits in terms of direct justice, ensuring that perpetrators of this crime are held accountable. are there other broader benefits as well for the international community, for Ukraine? And what are the potential pitfalls, perhaps, do you see of this tribunal? Well, not pitfalls, but maybe risks or risk areas.
Absolutely. Let me start with the risks. So the biggest risk that we see right now is thinking that um, Ukraine would be ready to sacrifice the tribunal on the negotiations table.
Mm.
And this is unfortunately a thought that is present among many interlocutors that we're engaging with. And it cannot be further from the truth. I can here say, officially in my capacity as a Ukrainian diplomat, that this will never, ever happen. Not just because no Ukrainian would ever understand this in terms of justice. Our people have an extreme thirst for justice, and no politician, no leader, no official who would go out there to people of Ukraine and say, "Okay, so we want peace with Russia, so we give up the special tribunal." He'll be immediately removed from power, if not lynched on the street. You know, our people have rather short fuse on the justice issues. Not only that, it gives a very dangerous signal in the decision making overall that justice can be compromised for the sake of peace. I mean, Ukraine wants peace, like no other nation wants, and we have engaged very in extreme good faith with our American and other partners to make sure that there is a settlement. We've given up significantly our demands. We're ready to settle on the current line of contact for the de facto cessation of hostilities without recognition in any way of the change of territorial sovereignty of Ukraine. But justice is not just a part of these negotiations at all. And this, I can also say that we have a very clear directives not to even consider including them in the negotiations. So this is a myth that I have to deal with debunking all over and over again. And that's the biggest risk that I see in connection with the tribunal. And that leads me to the point about the major benefit. Justice is one thing, and it is extremely important for us lawyers, but for the decision makers, for the geopolitical strategists, the major benefit of this tribunal is ensuring that the crime of the aggression, the start of wars against other states aimed specifically at territorial conquest and genocide, and whatever the Russians call it, recollection of their ancestral lands as they believe in their sick dreams. This is what is at stake right now. And if the Russians get away with it, and if the Belarusians, North Koreans, and Iranians, which have enabled and supported this aggression, because it's not a tribunal against Russia. Tribunal is called Special Tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine, and it's not limited to the leadership of the Russian Federation. It will consider all high-level people involved in planning, waging, and aiding and abetting this crime, not limited to the nationals of the Russian Federation or the top officials. And the very clear signal that we're trying to get across the whole world when we engage in this is that if you in your particular country, regardless of how far away it is from Europe and Ukraine, if you don't want to be invaded by your neighbor, if you don't want your people to suffer war crimes, crimes against humanity and genocide, which came after this aggression happened, because that was the original sin that opened the floodgates to all these atrocities, then you must support this special tribunal. Because it's not about Ukraine, it's about security, it's about the world that we live in, especially right now when the very existence of the rules-based order is either openly debated or even outright rejected by some of them, of those leaders who were earlier its most staunchest supporters. So if you still care about the system of international rules that prohibit aggression, then you must support the special tribunal for the crime of aggression. And we don't even ask for money. You don't need to join as full members. We have associate membership, which would allow other states just to participate and show their political will and resolve to punish those who commit aggression. So it's all about the game theory of international relations. if you do something and you do not get a punishment, or even if you're rewarded for it, that it sends a signal to everybody else that you could do just the same and get away with it, like Russians and Belarusians and North Koreans and Iranians hope to.
I think if you wrap that statement, which was quite profound, I thought, and you simply say, listen, if the crime of aggression is not prosecuted now, based on what Russia has done for Ukraine, it will be permanently normalized. That's for me, that's the reality on this. That what Russia is doing is trying to rewrite the norms of international law. And the whole post-World War II legal order is under threat. And Russia is a main driver of kind of rejecting these international universality of principles, legal norms, and they're moving into political relativism. And therefore, if they succeed in having achieved this war against Ukraine and not being held accountable for the aggression, then international law will be so injured and it will be so weakened that I personally, as an international lawyer, I'm not sure we'll be able to survive that. And that's what the stakes are so high right now. And the international community and the average citizen needs to understand that's what is at stake.
Yeah, I have one more question I want to introduce. I'm saving my most controversial question for last, even though it would probably follow well from this conversation. But I do just have one other thing that's been on my mind, I guess, as someone who studies courts, and that is, do you see challenges for this institution as such a young institution in terms of establishing its legitimacy? I mean, I think some of the things that you've referred to, the transparency of the appointment process, the openness and inclusion of other states in this, making it a truly international tribunal, I think these go some way towards answering any kind of like legitimacy concerns. But I mean, yeah, it's not an easy thing to set up a new court and to say this court has authority to make these decisions, to make these statements about acts of aggression, what constitutes the crime of aggression, who is guilty of aggression, or what it means to aid and abet a crime of aggression. Where does this court fit into, or indeed does this court simply stand alongside and contribute to the development of these norms in international law, or will it take a bit of time for that to come about? What do you think?
Well, I'll just say a few words and let Mykola end it then on this. But I look at this tribunal as being part of the mosaic of international law. There's something that started with Nuremberg, and it has been the arc of justice. And it moved in, it became silent through the Cold War. It reemerged at the fall of the Berlin Wall, where that became kind of the golden age of international justice. But all of this is part of the mosaic. And so we've talked about the International Criminal Court as being part of this process. Universal jurisdiction, which we've not mentioned, is also a key component of this kind of mosaic of international justice. Domestic prosecutions, what Ukraine is doing domestically is absolutely extraordinary. We've not seen anything like it in the way they are building up a legal system to ensure that those who've committed other crimes, like war crimes, crimes against humanity, all of this are brought to justice. But for me, this special tribunal for the crime of aggression is a critical component of this mosaic of international justice. And it should be supported in the same way that we're supporting these other elements, whether it's the ICC, domestic, universal jurisdiction. All of it in the end strengthens what emerged out of Nuremberg, what emerged out of World War II, and that is there are crimes, atrocity crimes, that must be brought, those that have committed those atrocity crimes must be brought to justice. There is no immunity for these types of acts. And this is all coming together, and that's why it's important, I think, for us to support this tribunal.
I don't have much to add on to that. I'll just reiterate the points that both Mark and I have made, that those who see the risk of fragmentation of international criminal law need to answer themselves a very clear question. If they believe that the Special Tribunal somehow undermines the ICC, would it be better than one of the most outrageous crimes of aggression in history was left unpunished? Or that we would create an imperfect, we agree it's not ideal, but an ad hoc mechanism that addresses the crime of aggression, keeps it relevant, keeps the prohibition relevant, which would then allow us to further strengthen the existing institutions. And in the long-term decision making, from which option the international criminal law and a rules-based order would benefit? That's a very simple and a rhetoric question.
I mean, it really is a binary, as you say, isn't it? It's either this ad hoc mechanism or nothing. And I think, whatever steps we can take towards upholding international norms are essential. And this does lead me into my last question, which I was honestly unsure if I should even raise this, because it's definitely going to be considered controversial in some circles. But, given that this tribunal is well on its way to being established, does this set a precedent for other special tribunals on aggression? I think one might not, looking around the world at the moment, you might, there's some states where we might be thinking, do we need a special tribunal on US acts of aggression, for example, or others in the future? I'm not asking you to sort of throw any given state under the bus or anything like that, but do we think that recognizing some of the limitations that the UN system currently has, will we potentially see more tribunals? Do we think the success of this tribunal in getting to this set up so quickly will be able to be replicated for other situations, or is this a one-off? What do we think?
Let me start, Mark, if you don't mind.
Nope.
I do not think that will set a precedent for the other tribunals. Actually, that is very much not objective. As I've mentioned earlier, this is a one-time ad hoc solution, which should not lead to. We do not want any other special tribunals on the crimes of aggression created. And the reason for that is that we have the ICC, we have the existing system, which we must support. And as you know, Ukraine has ratified the Kampala amendments and is participating in further review process. And at the same time, I should only note that with all deficiencies of the United Nations system, it was only thanks to the United Nations that we have this tribunal in the first place. Because if on the 2nd March of 2022, 141 states wouldn't have come together and in extremely strong for an UN resolution terms and not condemned the Russian aggression, and I can even quote the language that the UN General Assembly deplores in the strongest terms the aggression by the Russian Federation. And it's the first time in my memory that aggression, the term of aggression, was used by a United Nations General Assembly in such context. That means that we have a one-of-a-kind situation. I mean, of course, I will be roasted by those who will be calling to other contexts where other violations of international law have happened. But the fact is, here we have the United Nations, 141 states, actively condemning this and demanding Russian Federation to stop this, to cease its use of force. For other contexts, we didn't have a similar unanimity of the world in condemning acts of aggression. Now, of course, if this year another major war similar to the Russian war against Ukraine happens, and if the United Nations come together to deplore and condemn it, in theory, that could lead to another special tribunal. But first of all, we hope that this potential war does not happen. And second of all, we need to also work on strengthening the International Criminal Court to make sure that it has the full harmony of jurisdiction with respect to all of the crimes in the Rome Statute.
I would just add, I mean, there's nothing I would disagree with that, because I think that's I think it's absolutely accurate. And I think the international community, I'll now speak on behalf of the IBA and others, that when states or individuals that are in the position of authority do violate international law, we speak out, and we are critical, and we demand accountability. That will never stop. Whether it's the United States, it doesn't matter. We will always do that. We are always consistent because we lean into what international law demands us to do. But this is quite unique because Mykola has already alluded to the fact that the UN General Assembly, I think, Mykola, they've come out with 8 or 9 resolutions during this war. It's quite extraordinary in the number of times they've spoken out. That indicates the type of coalition that exists. In addition to having the entire Council of Europe having driven this whole idea of a special tribunal for the crime of aggression. So, is it impossible that we would not see another ad hoc tribunal in the future? No, legally, there's nothing that would stop that. But you need more than that. You need this coalition, this consensus, the recognition that what we're witnessing now is the textbook example of the crime of aggression, and certainly the most egregious violation of international law that, in my opinion, that I've seen since World War II. That's why you have this consensus, you have this political willingness, and this coalition. That's what it makes this one quite unique, and that's what we focus on.
Yeah, and I think it does. I think we've all seen international lawyers coming to the defense of the system in recent weeks and reasserting the need to articulate these norms, and the tribunal has enormous potential to really assist in just, I'm going to say the word re-foundationalizing, very aware that that is not a word, but just re-establishing the core nature of this norm. Look, thank you both so much.
So that's what you just said is so critical, though. That is the key. You're absolutely, whether that's a word or not, I am exactly what you're saying. That is absolutely right.
You heard it here on Call to the Bar first, folks, re-foundationalizing. Now, look, we wrap up these episodes always with a slightly lighter note, and we love to ask our first-time guests 3 core questions. And they always say they're the trickiest questions. First of all, what recommendations do you have for anyone who would like to know more about what we've discussed today? Any books or articles? Secondly, what are you working on directly at the moment? And third, what is your current escape route? What do you read or view or do that takes your mind off international law?
Paula?
Recommendations is my professor Boromensky, who is one of the most outstanding Ukrainian legal scholars, has often criticized international lawyers for what he calls an international legal infantilism or naivety. And I have to admit, despite his recommendations, I've lived through this rose-tinted glasses view on international law myself, especially before the war came to my home in 2014. So my first recommendation for anyone studying international law would be to study also the international relations, economics, and decision-making. One of the most important things to understand about international law is not what the rules say, but why they say what they say. How did the states came to an agreement to establish a certain rule, whether it be in treaty, custom, or a general principle of law, and what have been the driving forces behind this. I can say, like with the example of the Ottawa Convention on the Anti-Personnel Mines, which has been drafted with the best ideas in mind, but it turned out completely impracticable in our circumstances, where the anti-personnel mines are the only way we can stop the Russians from killing our people, and we were forced to suspend it. And some states disagreed with that, and we had to then explain, I mean, as much as anti-personnel mines are evil by design and are not able to differentiate between civilians and those directly participating in the hostilities or combatants, they are necessary for self-defense against an existential threat that we have. So when I started examining how the Ottawa Convention came into place, it was drafted by those humanitarians who've seen its horrible consequences, but the military were not involved. And after the Ottawa Convention was adopted, the NATO countries started reviewing their combat manuals, and it turned out they have no alternative for an area denial weapon. So that is the way where international law may go into a more idealistic direction than practically possible. So that would be my first recommendation. Try to get out of the international law textbooks, read them, but also read about the world around. Read history books, read books on international relations. That is extremely important to understand the context that you're working on. The second, what I'm working on at the moment is, in addition to the Special Tribunal and the Claims Commission. So the Claims Commission Convention has been signed in December. It's another important element of the accountability for the Russian aggression. We're working on ensuring that the 25 ratifications happen this year so that the Claims Convention enters into force. And those of you who are hearing me right now, or when this will be recorded, please talk to your MPs and make sure that they ratify the convention. It's extremely important. That's a topic for another discussion, but nonetheless. And my other extremely urgent area of work is the use of Russian immobilized assets. So all these discussions on the reparation loan, on the use of proceeds, the error loans, and again, that's a topic for many parallel discussions. And finally, about the escape routes. So one book I'm reading is called The Anxious Generation, about the dangers of social media and smartphones for the upcoming generations. And as a father of a 6-year-old daughter, it is an extremely relevant book. Because the temptation to give additional screen time to a child is out there, especially when my wife is also a lawyer working in human rights, so we're constantly engaged in work and sometimes not enough time to offer to our daughter. But this is a book I highly recommend everyone to read. But as a completely escape route, maybe a not classical recommendation, there's a video game called Civilization. I didn't like the final installment, the 7th one. It was subpar, to be fair, but Civilization 6 and Humankind, which is quite a similar game. So these are two of my favorite games. I have to say I play them like once every 5-6 months because I rarely find time to. But after we visited Australia on the flight back, I actually opened a laptop and launched a game for the Australian leader. I wanted to explore the outback from the video game perspective. So that is the escapism that I sometimes allow myself.
Amazing. I only ever got up to Civ 5. I haven't played Civ 6. We're very pro video game on this podcast. Mark, how about you?
Oh gosh, I'm depressed now because I'm not going to tell you any video games because I have a 17-year-old son who just turned 18, and I'm desperately always trying to get him off those and into other things. So, but anyway, that's the way it goes. Just quickly, I would say, what recommendations? Well, I'm not going to promote a new book that I just came out with Ambassador David Schefter called the UN Charter. 5 Pillars for Humankind. But I will say, if I were to recommend reading generally, I would go back and read the Charter. Having just, again, as I mentioned earlier, just marked the 80th anniversary. This is an extraordinary document for me. It's the most important secular document in the world. It represents kind of the constitution of the international community. Having young people go back, and it's not long, but having young people go back and just read that charter, I think they'll understand pretty quickly the hope and aspirations that civilization and states had 80 years ago, and they set out a roadmap, and I'm just hoping we can keep going back to that roadmap because we seem to be slipping away from it, as we know. Other, what did you say, working on at the moment? Unfortunately, in my overseeing the IBA, it's always kind of these crises that are coming up. Iran now is a big focus for us right now. The kind of the demise to me of the rule of law through this populism, nationalism that has been driving a driving force. But I have to say, I don't get too far away from Ukraine. Over these past 4 years, there's not one issue that has taken more of my time by a long shot than Ukraine, and it's because how I feel about the not only its people, not only the country, but as I've tried to say today, what this means for the international community, what this means for the future. And so it's what it's what I wake up to every day, and I just keep focusing on it. And that's what I do. Except when I take a break and I drag my son to go fly fishing, and that's how I escape. Because if I'm out, and he's become a bit of a fly fisherman, which I'm really excited about, but when I'm out there on the river and I'm just casting and focusing on the fishing, absolutely nothing comes back to my mind other than the moment of being there in the wilderness and trying to catch the trout. So that's what I do. I don't do it enough as I should, but that's what I do.
Freshly caught trout, there is like few things more delicious in this
Yes.
world.
Yeah, exactly.
And look, and I will also just say to our listeners, Mark was aware of the existence of the fact that the BTS comeback is this week, so we can mark him down as one of our K-pop international law fans as well.
It's true. It's true.
Now, look, thank you both so much for joining us here on Cold to the Bar, and thank you for listening. We will see you next time. Bye bye.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
Bye all.